Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at BTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two very important stories. The first is with reference to what the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has spoken about at the recent conference on interaction confidence building measures that he attended in Kazakhstan, in which the Prime Minister talked about a number of issues and most importantly what Pakistan is focusing on at the moment and the kind of relations it seeks with its neighbors, including India. And this is something that Pakistan has reiterated time and again, the fact that this is what Pakistan desires, which is peace and dialogue, and something to move forward to with regards to bilateral trade and investment as well. However, unfortunately, we have seen that in the past also whatever initiatives that Pakistan has taken in this regard have not been reciprocated by the Indian side. And this time around too, this is what the Prime Minister reiterated, that the onus of dialogue and peace initiatives is now on India, especially with regards to what has happened back in 2019, the unilateral decisions taken by India, and then of course the kind of atrocities that we see in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And of course, along with that, the kind of treatment that is being meted out to the very large Muslim population and other minorities living within India as well. And so when we see that situation and when we talk about the kind of human rights violations and abuses that exist in the so-called democratic India, it begs the question that, of course, when we talk about peace and dialogue, it has to come from the Indian side as well, and the onus and responsibility remains on them to be able to start that and to be able to show their will and their intent of purpose, as the Prime Minister spoke about with regards to such initiatives. And unfortunately, we have not seen that so far. This is something that the Prime Minister mentioned along with other issues such as that of Afghanistan, Palestine, and then of course the floods that Pakistan is continuing to suffer from. Along with this, of course, we're going to be taking a look at what this means in terms of our relationship with countries in this particular conference as well, and how Pakistan is going to be moving forward with its foreign policy with every country, specifically in the context of India. In our second segment, we will be taking a look at what unfortunately seems to have been forgotten but is still an ever-present crisis within the country, and that is of course the devastating floods that have impacted Pakistan. And Pakistan has talked about this at every forum and also mentioned this very important fact that Pakistan contributes less than 1% in global carbon emissions, and that means that this is not something that we had asked for or done anything to deserve. And so when we take a look at the kind of situation that exists right now, it becomes more of a matter of justice than of aid or humanitarian assistance. This, of course, is an important factor because this will take form or the climate change narrative, which needs to take into account the loss and damage of countries such as Pakistan that are being impacted unfairly by the climate change issues and the global carbon emissions, and the responsibility so of course lies elsewhere. This is something that has been spoken about quite vigorously at every forum by the Foreign Office and of course the Prime Minister as well. So we're going to take a look at what the current situation is, where we stand in terms of the floods, and what sort of issues do we need to now focus on, since of course, as the Prime Minister also mentioned, there is a lot of crisis going on in terms of post-flood situation with regards to food and health crisis. And then of course we're going to be able to not be able to assess the kind of damage that we currently need to be dealing with until all of the water actually recedes. So we're still not in a position to be able to understand exactly how much damage has been put in place. But of course, there have been numerous people who have been affected, and so we need to be able to do something about it. For this and more, as always, in the studios, we've been joined by senior analyst Raja Faisal, and today we've also been joined in the studios by a very special guest, Dr. Ishtiyaq Ahmed, who's an author and analyst who's joined us in the studios. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiyaq, for joining us. And we have been joined online by senior analyst Farrukh Batafi and former ambassador Najma Saqib. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us in this show today. Let me start with you, Dr. Ishtiyaq. When we take a look at the current situation with regards to the political developments that we see in the kind of foreign policy emphasis that Pakistan has been placing along with its relations with the neighbors as well, we have seen the way that Pakistan has proceeded with its engagements with different countries and what it desires out of its regional or bilateral engagements. But when it comes to India, of course, there is a lot of complication involved, and because of that, we haven't really been able to even proceed towards a direction where we can talk about a bilateral engagement or a positive development. And that, of course, boils down to the issue of Kashmir. And because of the way that the human rights violations continue to exist there and elsewhere within India, of course, the Prime Minister's statement is clear that the onus is on the Indian side, and this is how we're going to take it forward. But is that something that we can really expect India to be doing at the moment? Because it seems that rather than moving towards a positive development, India has been continuously deteriorating.
Well, the simple answer is no. Because if we look at the state of India-Pakistan relationship since the 1990s, during which various attempts were made to bring the two countries together in a normalization process. I think twice, once in the 1990s under the previous regime of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and then during General Musharraf's government, we had this 8-point composite dialogue. Various rounds took place, and apart from obviously Kashmir was #1 unresolved issue, and there were so many other issues. Pakistan tried to sincerely negotiate all other issues including Kashmir, but if we look at the trajectory in the last 30 years at least, in which I have somehow as a student and as a professional observed regional diplomacy in South Asia, especially India-Pakistan relationship, the problem has always been from the Indian side. India is a status quo power. It doesn't want, it has grabbed an important part of the subcontinent which belonged to Pakistan, namely the Kashmir region, and it is an international dispute. In 2019, it basically took this issue to the next level by grabbing this territory unconstitutionally in violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. And not only it did so, it also in the last 3 years has been gradually changing the very demographics of Kashmir, displacing the majority Kashmiri Muslim population, settling Hindu majority, bringing in non-Kashmiri investors. So there are now tens of thousands of the very security forces which served in Kashmir, brutalized its population. Now they are the citizens of this disputed territory. So this is what the qualitative shift has taken place, which is why my personal stance, having been associated with issue, analyzing it and lobbying it at the UN Human Rights Council along with Mirwais Umar Farooq a couple of times, my personal issue has always been that we should have been very proactive, especially in the immediate aftermath of August 5, 2019. We should have taken this matter to the International Court of Justice, because at least one provision of the statutes of this ICJ, I think if we could have explored at that time, it would have allowed us to seek the ICJ jurisdiction and presented our legal case before this international body based upon the fact that Kashmir is an international dispute between India and Pakistan. Kashmiris and their right to self-determination is the central issue here, and as long as it is there are so many UN Security Council resolutions passed on this dispute, it remains an international dispute.
Don't we have that option right now as well?
Well, I wish that the previous regime should have not wasted time, should have been quite proactive, not only on the legal front but also in the diplomatic front. But somehow I see a glimmer of hope right now that at least there is some kind of a proactive diplomacy at various global platforms, including SICA. Currently our Prime Minister is in Kazakhstan attending this very important Asian body, previously at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, then the UN General Assembly last, and where our leadership has started to focus upon the the central issue in our national security policy, which is that Pakistan has always stood for peace between India and Pakistan, peace in the neighborhood, and simultaneously, however, we link our expectations for peace with the resolution of the lingering Kashmir dispute, which is a humanitarian issue, it is a people's issue, it cannot be limited to ethnicity, religion,
of course,
and other aspects.
Of course. Ambassador Saqib, when we take a look at this particular issue, the way that the international community is viewing it, of course, there is the important aspect that Pakistan keeps on highlighting at every forum, that this is something that is happening, and this is what needs to be done about it, or this is whose responsibility it is. But at the end of the day, what's really happening is quite apparent in terms of how much time has gone by since, of course, these violations exist, and then since also 2019, when the unilateral actions were taken, which were completely against the UN Security Council resolutions. But it seems as though whatever moves that are not in line with international norms or regulations can still go unpunished. With the case of India, they have. And then when we talk about the kind of options that we have, we still are only left with being able to just talk about these issues, and that's what we're doing, projecting that as much as we can. But at the end of the day, that's all that's been happening. So it's kind of a status quo at the moment, which is not benefiting the population of Kashmir. So what can really be done about it? Because we sort of know the stance of the international community and how much they are willing to go towards an actual resolution of this, or how much the UN has a stronghold over this entire issue. If that is the case, then it means that we're just stuck here forever. Do you think that's true?
Thank you very much, Sana. You have actually said it all. I would like you and all your, millions of viewers to just focus on the statement which has been given by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in this SICA conference. There are 2 or 3 catchwords in this, and I would like to focus on that, and that has got the answer. Okay. For instance, when you say that we are willing and ready, absolutely willing and ready for regional peace and prosperity, the onus is on New Delhi. What does this mean? It means that whatever we have said, and your eminent, panelist has drawn our attention to the history of all that. And if you see 1948, 1965, 1971, and even 2002 standoff between Pakistan and India, the only problem has been the dispute of Jammu and Kashmir. So they know it. They know it. Now, once you say that the onus is on India, that means that India has to respond. India has to respond to the UN Security Council's relevant resolutions. India has to respond to why and where and how and why not, all these questions. The second point is the meaningful, when the Prime Minister said the meaningful and result-orientated talks or engagement. For India, the matter regarding the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir is sorted out. It is signed, sealed, and delivered, particularly in view of the 5th of August 2019, all those 370 and 35A and all those things which we all know. By doing that, India has signed, sealed, and delivered. For India, the main issue is the so-called terrorism that they want to talk about. So what happens is, right now, there is absolutely no forum where Pakistan and India could face each other. There used to be foreign secretary level talks. The foreign minister used to talk to each other, and the foreign offices of New Delhi and Islamabad were in touch. There was a dialogue going on, called the composite dialogue. Now, for the last many years, we do not have any forum where Pakistan and India could face-to-face talk about it. Now, your question is, what should we do? I think if you look at it from a pragmatic point of view, the only solution right now is that Pakistan should go, into a full-fledged war with India and have this matter settled by any means. But both countries are nuclear. both countries, they know the damage that can cause to each other. So for me, for my army, for my foreign office, for my government, or for the state of Pakistan, war is not an option. So once we say that war is not an option, then the only option left is what we have been doing since 1948. After 1965, the Simla Agreement, the United Nations Security Council. But there is a good news also here. When people talk about, look, what is Pakistan doing with regard to Kashmir and that government and previous government and the present government? Look, after even this, of all these actions that the New Delhi government, the second tenure of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, 5th of August 2019, the world did not respond to it. For the world, the United Nations Security Council resolutions are still on the agenda of the United Nations. It means the issue is alive. Number two, your diplomats, your foreign office, even your Pakistani expats, they are celebrating in October, the Kashmir Black Day, in February, Kashmir Solidarity Day. Wherever there are Kashmiris, they are, urging the international community.
Right, I understand that.
No, the problem lies not with Pakistan or its diplomat. The problem lies that those who can actually decide and bring India to the negotiating table for a meaningful and result-oriented dialogue that has, they have their own axe to grind. For instance, the United States of America, and when I say United States of America, include in it the entire European Union, include it in the United Nations Security Council and every important body, they want India to counter China in South Asia and play the role of a policeman, which India has been doing. So
absolutely, I understand that. But at the end of the day, of course, we also have to see in terms of who's really going to do that, because it seems that whenever we talk about any conflict or issue, again, it remains between those two parties, and what we get internationally is at the maximum condemnations or a proxy war, which is not something, of course, that we can afford or talk about. But then, Farooq, when we look at this entire situation and what Ambassador Saab was saying earlier, especially with regards to the issues of the onus being on India and how this is something that they'll have to respond to. But I want to understand, how is it that moving forward we're going to be able to support that statement in terms of India having to do something? Because that means there should be a consequence, that means there should be something or a reason or a motivation behind what they're doing. They don't seem to have one, and there doesn't seem to be any body or any consequence to actually have that sort of a factor to play in terms of them acting in such a way. Neither do they really care about what's going on, because of course if they're involved in those human rights violations and this illegal occupation, they're not interested in the freedom of the Kashmiri population. So what's going to really drive them to actually come to the negotiating table?
Right, Sana, the way you actually framed the question, my only answer can be magic. Without magic, perhaps nothing can happen. But before I actually dive into this question or try to find an answer, let me pay my regards to both your worthy guests. I always learn from both of them, Dr. Ishaq and Ambassador Saab. It is always great sharing the screen with you. But regarding what we were discussing earlier, Sana, as far as, Narendra Modi is concerned, recently he spoke in Gujarat, and it is quite clear that at least in his mind, he has settled, not anything else, but settled the Kashmir dispute. What does that mean? It would actually imply that somehow, because if you remember Indian propaganda within the country is such that they keep on inhaling their own propaganda, and there was a time when they told the world that there was surgical strike. Wasn't any. Pakistan showed evidence to the entire world, but they kept on inhaling that propaganda, and then the Bollywood started making movies. Then, of course, there was the matter of F-16. Honestly, there are Indians who still think that an F-16 was down by their plane. And unfortunately, even though the U.S., the said, have said that there wasn't such a thing, but they keep on insisting. So that means that India has convinced itself after 2019 situation, they have solved the issue of Kashmir, and it is no more an issue. Indian government keeps on pretending that if it shuts its eye, Pakistan will disappear. That is not going to happen, right? In that kind of a situation, what I can confess is that I am really conflicted because of two impulses. One impulse is that I believe that India has taken the same turn, sad turn that we took in 1979, and we became reactionary, and after that we had to fight a war against terrorism to extricate country out of that kind of benighted extremism. India is actually plunging into that darkness, and that means that in longer run, India is going to destroy itself or damage itself, not destroy. I know that Indians actually call such people who actually talk about destruction as Tukle Tukle gang. I'm not a part of any Tukle Tukle gang. I'm a peacenik, right? But Indians are actually self-harming themselves, and they are actually in the long run going to compromise their capacity to be a very vibrant democracy, because India is a federation. India is not a natural nation. Every 20 kilometers, every 50 kilometers, the country changes, the language changes, the race changes, the people change. So what was keeping them together was secularism. It was a multicultural democracy, and sadly they have decided to, depart from that. So my wish would be that Pakistan does not try to seek any kind of resolution of Kashmir issue, because now that we have taken a right turn and we are actually, at least in our mind, we know where we have to go. We will eventually, although we are struggling today, we will find way to gain strength, and then India can, of course, if it is weakened, we can negotiate from strength. But then there is another problem, because there is no resolution to Kashmir, because there is no dialogue, Kashmiris keep on suffering. So what I would actually suggest is that we keep on investing in ourselves and start dialogue. And this is where I actually very respectfully disagree with the Prime Minister that the onus essentially has to be on India, because at this moment, whatever gets peace is essential. So whether Pakistan initiates or India initiates, there has to be some peace dialogue.
Okay.
Can
so,
that be
Farrukh, are you saying that we should be
Yes.
initiating irrespective of the reversal of 2019's decisions?
I think that regardless of that, we still had many back channel dialogues going on. We know that it was widely reported as well. So if that is happening, diplomacy continues. Countries like China and India have not resolved their disputes over borders, but they continue to talk. We should be talking as well, but that doesn't mean that we all of a sudden declare that whatever India did was right. Of course, we have our reservations, but dialogue is essential at this moment.
Right, absolutely. Faisal, we have very less time for this segment, I've been told, so I'm just going to ask your intake as well within this, of course, very important discussion. The important part also, and I'm sure you have other things to add as well, but another important part that the Prime Minister added was with regards to talking about how there is this guise of democracy and democratic values under which all of these human rights violations are being hidden by India, and of course this is to divert the world's attention. But I've been hearing these statements for quite some time when we talk about diverting the world's attention somewhere. Is that really successful, both within and outside of India, when we talk about such blatant violations as to what is going on? Does the problem lie in the fact that people don't know, or are they just turning a blind eye, or do they really not understand what is going on? Is this a successful way of diverting attention when you talk about democratic values but have none?
Well, they don't have any democratic values at all. People keep on talking about secularism of India. There is no secularism in India, and that is why I would go towards the conclusion that right now whatever is going on within India, it will lead towards a balkanization. At least it is my wish that it happens, because once it happens, of course it would be good for the Kashmir cause as well. And if we currently look at Kashmir and talking to India about a resolve to Kashmir, then of course we must seek the reversal of 370 and 35A abrogations that took place back in days. And whatever happened after that, of course I'm talking about the delimitations, of course I'm talking about the colonies they've started creating, of course I'm talking about the center of gravity of the valley. They want to take it to Jammu, and of course they want to give Jammu the main power, and they just want to keep valley as subordinate to Jammu. And everything has happened in between that should be reversed, and it should go back to whatever it was before the abrogation of 370 and 35A. Number one. And number two, right now we know that last month, of course, we had a positive signal from the Americans, in which Secretary Blinken, he talked with media, and he said that he would be requiring both India and Pakistan to talk to each other. In this context, of course, America can play its role. America can influence India right now, because they have their sort of alliances with them. Quad alliance is one of them. And of course we know that US is posing India against China, and at the same time there is another thing that India is cautious about, and that is two-front war. If two-front war takes place, I would recommend that whatever Ambassador Najmul Saqib has earlier said, that there should be a full-fledged war, that full-fledged war should take place when it is a two-front war, because in that case, of course, we can take our territory back. And if we talk about, everyone says that nobody should be supporting Kashmiris. The armed struggle should be supported. Why? Because United Nations says so. When somebody is given a right to self-determination, as Kashmiris are given, then we, not only we, all of the Muslim countries and whoever in the world that has some kind of link with the Kashmiris, they must support that armed struggle, because we should not be forgetting the fact that Kashmir is one of the most militarized zone in the world, and a carnage is going out there, and it is, being not a Muslim, being a human, it is our responsibility to help people of Kashmir. And this is the resolve that I see it. If not by hook, then it should be taken by crook.
And the right to self-determination, in fact, is something that everybody has and perhaps is not given. But when we talk about, of course, this issue, there is so much that we still need to explore. But since we have limited time, we also need to talk about the very important issue that Pakistan is currently facing, which is with regards to the devastating floods that have hit the country and the climate change issues that the country has to pay the price for. And that in terms of a huge number of people that have lost their lives so far. More than 1,700 people have lost their lives. Millions have been displaced. There have been a lot of issues with regards to food, with regards to health, and then of course moving forward, winters are also coming in, and there is a lot that the people need our help with. There is of course a lot of aid, a lot of help coming in from countries that have been generous, but unfortunately the crisis is so huge that it's just not enough. We're glad that the UN flash appeal was revised and is now at $816 million, which is important considering the amount of damage that has happened so far, which still of course is not the accurate assessment which we'll get once the water recedes. Dr. Ishtiaq, when we take a look at all of this situation, of course, it's extremely grave, but it's also extremely important for the world to understand that this is something that Pakistan, of course, needs help with and needs the kind of justice that the UN Secretary General also mentioned when he visited Pakistan, and then also at various platforms where he talked about how those responsible for global carbon emissions need to do something about it. But unfortunately, so far, discussions around climate change issues have not incorporated loss and damage, and how perhaps the financial aspect of it needs to be catered to with regards to countries such as Pakistan. Is this something you think can change now in the aftermath of the extent of these devastating floods? Because as we see the kind of predictions that are being made with regards to climate change issues, it only seems that it's going to get worse and going to expand to other countries as well. And so we're all in this together. But is this something the world has reached a consensus about? Because it seems perhaps there are still countries that are not prioritizing it enough.
Well, Sana, thank you for asking me this question. Actually, last month I joined the Planning Commission of Pakistan as a member.
Right.
So I'm privy to some details, as we receive them from the international community, from our partners, managing this crisis together, and the extent, the scale and magnitude of the disaster itself. So basically a lot is happening right now. As you know, we are still in the last phase of the rescue and relief operations. We have reconnected the various parts of the disaster zone, and soon we will be entering the most crucial and the most expensive phase of rehabilitation and reconstruction. And reconstruction this time, because of the climate issue, will be climate sensitive, climate adaptable. And I think the world community so far has really responded with rare generosity. And the UN itself, as you pointed out, that within a month or so was forced to revise the amount by well over $600 million. What I can tell you right now is that so far the damage to economy and infrastructure is more than 30 billion. But obviously there is a post-damage need assessment going on, in which the government of Pakistan is partnering with its international development partners, especially the World Bank. And soon, I think probably by the third week of this month, we will get this detailed report. And on the basis of this report, and the UN Secretary General was kind enough actually to issue a clarion call, by stating that this is not an issue of Pakistan, begging some money from the world because of a disaster that has taken place. It is an issue of climate justice.
Absolutely.
And as you pointed out, that the irony here is that Pakistan contributes, I think, less than 1% of global, carbon emissions. G20 nations contribute 80%. So ultimately, the issue is very simple.
Right.
The polluters have to pay. And Pakistan's stand, given the goodwill that we have received this time from the international community, including from the United States, especially from the Chinese. And so we are not making it an issue of reparations. We are not even stressing, the debt relief and issues like that. What we are saying is that this is an issue of partnership. It's a collective issue. And I think the ones who have polluted the global climate should compensate the poorer nations of the world who are at the receiving end. And we have seen in Pakistan, that still Pakistan is still neck deep in water.
It is. 3
months, after the rains began. So the problem was not, hill torrents or flash floods and then devastating, the parts. These are rains, which fell for 3-4 days, which is almost close to 200% more than perhaps the entire history of Pakistan.
Exactly.
So issue is very serious. I think the global community is also willing. The French president was kind enough to offer Paris as a place where the International Donors Conference on Pakistan will probably take place next month. So once this post-damage need assessment report is there, we will see exactly how much damage has taken place to infrastructure and economy, and I suspect that it will be surely more than $30 billion.
Right. Yeah.
And we go to Paris basically with the expectations that this essential obligation which the richer nations have to meet will be met according to Pakistani expectations.
Yes,
Right.
Sana, very quickly I'll
Yes.
go towards Ambassador Najmul Saqib. Najmul Saqib Saab, Uh, Obviously, Dr. Ishtiaq rightly pointed out that we should be seeking the climate justice. Are we getting it? And if we don't get it, then what is the next for us, next step for us? Obviously, he talked about Paris. Should we look towards the Paris Club as well for getting the waivers when it comes to our deaths, sir? And how positive that would be if we get them waivers, sir?
And again, Ambassador Saab, with regards to, of course, ensuring something happens, who's going to be that authority in terms of ensuring, as Dr. Ishtiaq was saying, that the global polluters should compensate or pay, but who's going to make them pay?
Look, Pakistan's problems were facilitated, in getting the answer by Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General. After his visit, he actually mentioned this figure, $30 billion, and the flash appeal, etc. The important thing is that world is pledging, but where is the money? Yeah. And if the money comes, what about the dissemination system? I must confess here that in such a calamity, such devastating, situation, of course, the international community is cognizant of the fact that all those facts and figures which were obvious to us for the last 10 years, more than 10 years, that Pakistan's, contribution in emission, less than 1%, and Pakistan's vulnerability in the top 10. We knew it, but the world would like also to know what actions or what steps that we have taken in the last 10, 15 years. So there is the, that lack of policy. If I ask you, who is the Federal Secretary dealing with the climate, change ministry, I am sure you don't know. What is the climate change ministry doing right now except issuing statements? What happens is that the response from your rich and affluent people, absolutely zero. The response from the relevant line ministries, absolutely zero. And the only argument that we could come up with was that since our contribution in the climate change problems is less than 1%, the greenhouse emissions and all that, that is why we are a victim. Playing a victim card is one thing, but doing, you have to deal with the crisis yourself. These pledges will materialize, it will take years. And by that time, your problems will increase many folds, include the food security in it, include the diseases in it. So what should we do? Number one, that we need to take follow-up actions, which we don't take. If the world says, this much amount, France has pledged, or the United States, the US aid, or UAE, and etc. What are we doing about this? Are we just waiting, or we need to take follow-up action? This is one. And in this regard, your embassies and consulates, they can play a pivotal role. Number two, in the meantime, to know that our indigenous resources, they have to be employed and see that how best we can deal with this crisis, which is my crisis, which is my country's crisis first. International community comes later. Number three, that it looked as if, this United Nations General Assembly session was held only for the floods in Pakistan. Look, there is a heat wave in Europe. There is an actual war going on in Europe, the Ukraine war. There are floods and devastating floods in many countries of the world. The most positive and encouraging response from the world or from the United Nations itself, including the United States of America and European countries, was regarding Pakistan. We should not be very satisfied and happy with this. We need to know, when are we going to translate these pledges into reality? And this donors conference, we should not wait for them to issue a date. We should not wait for them to either hold it in New York and Paris. We should proactively approach this. All our embassies should contact their, especially the European countries, they should contact their host government, and ask them that France has offered, the United Nations, Antonio Guterres has offered, let us have this donor conference, and the buck will not stop there. After the donors, conference, we need to take further follow-up action. So my request to Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and the Foreign Office and all those ambassadors who are working right now there, that this is an action time, and please do not just say that we are a victim of the climate change. Talk about the realities, and the reality is that the United Nations has itself told us $30 billion and 816 million flash appeal. Let us talk about this flash appeal. How are we going to do it?
Absolutely. Of course, there are a number of questions that still remain to be answered. Farokh, when we take a look at the situation, of course, there is the important responsibility that exists globally. But there is, of course, a lot that also exists in terms of our responsibility at home, as Ambassador Saab was saying. And we understand, of course, that these floods were massive in scale, but we have had floods which we have earlier also called unprecedented, or other disasters as we've called unprecedented. And so we have had time or space to be able to focus on these issues. Have we done enough in terms of now, in the aftermath of these floods, to be prepared for a situation that can arise again within Pakistan with regards to climate change issues? Because of course the financial or global responsibility aspects is one thing, but if we are really going to be moving forward in terms of being more prepared, isn't there a lot that needs to be done at the moment to handle that crisis? And then with regards to the way that even more crises are unfolding as a consequence of these floods, are we really in a position in terms of having the capacity to go ahead with measures at the moment right now, considering our economic situation as well? And very quickly, since we're short on time.
Right. Sana, since you were a bit of your question is about past, the answer is obviously not. That's why we are here. Regarding the future, I tell you what, the biggest problem is we don't know how often this kind of an incident is going to take place. Is it going to be an annual thing? Is it going to reappear in 5 years, 10 years, whatever? But you know, I understand that you have tough time, but you allowed others to actually make the point. Allow me also to conclude.
Go ahead, go ahead.
You know, earlier Ishaq was mentioning the Planning Commission. In fact, the head of Planning Commission is also head of NRFCC, right? The body that is there for the coordination of relief regarding flood. So when we were being briefed there, we were told that the international community's response is very good and there is no complaint. There was this concern, again, I also flagged the flash appeal issue, the gap between the expectations and the response. So they said that that is not a big issue. We are getting what we need. The only thing is, first of all, we have to actually assess the damage. And that's why World Bank's assessment that is going on is very important. Once you have a final figure, a final number, then you can actually ask for help as well, and it will be given. But regarding domestic support, again, you are losing patience. Regarding domestic support, they said that the sad part is that our own response from our own people at the start was huge, but it has actually petered out. And that was the worrying bit, right? At this moment, we have to actually take care of ensuring that we are doing our part. If we do that, I'm sure the world will also.
Right, absolutely. And thank you very much, Farokh, for making your point. And we're unfortunately out of time. But thank you very much, Farokh Patafi, Ambassador Najma Saqib, and Dr. Ishtaq for joining us. And of course, Raja Faisal for being with us in the studio as well. This is all that we have. There's so much that needs to be done. And we hope that we can prioritize and focus on those that need our attention the most. That's all that we have. We'll see you tomorrow.